As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Separate tech and state. Some libertarians dismiss concerns over social media companies' suppression of news and opinions that contradict select agendas by pointing out that these platforms are private property and not part of the government. There are two problems with this argument. First, there is nothing unlibertarian about criticizing private businesses or using peaceful and voluntary means, such as boycotts, to persuade businesses to change their practices. The second and most significant reason the "they are private companies" argument does not hold water is the tech companies' censorship has often been done at the request of government officials. The extent of government involvement with online censorship was revealed in emails between government and employees of various tech companies. In these emails, the government officials addressed employees of these private companies as though these employees were the government officials' subordinates. Government officials using their authority to silence American citizens is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. Yet some conservative elected officials and writers think the solution to the problem of big tech censorship is giving government more power over technology companies. These pro-regulation conservatives ignore the fact that it would be just as unconstitutional if a conservative administration was telling tech companies who they must allow to access their platforms as it is when progressives order social media companies to deplatform certain individuals. Furthermore, since the average government official's political views are closer to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez than to Marjorie Taylor Greene, giving government more power over social media companies is likely to lead to more online censorship of conservatives. Instead of giving government more power over social media, defenders of free speech should work to separate tech and state. An excellent place to start is pushing for passage of the Free Speech Protection Act. Unlike other legislation such as the Patriot Act and the Affordable Care Act, this bill is accurately named. Introduced by Kentucky Senator Rand Paul and Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, this bill makes it a crime for any federal employee or employee of a federal contractor to use his position to communicate with a social media company to interfere with any American's exercise of First Amendment's protected rights. Violators of this law would face fines of at least $10,000 as well as suspension, demotion or even termination, and a lifetime ban from working with the federal government. In addition to working to pass the Free Speech Protection Act, those who object to the big technology companies' content moderation policies should abandon big tech for more free speech-friendly platforms. Many of the newer social media companies were started to meet the demand for a content moderation-free alternative to the dominant companies. Senator Paul himself stopped posting videos on YouTube because of its suppression of free speech. While My Liberty Report still airs on YouTube, its main platform is Rumble. It is wonderful to do a show on any topic chose without worrying about being canceled. Big tech censorship is a problem created by big government. The solution lies not with giving government more power, but with separating tech and state. Passing the Free Speech Protection Act and making big tech pay a price for cooperating with big government by leaving to use sites like Rumble are two excellent places to start.
So Qatar announced on Monday that Israel and Hamas agreed to extend the truce under the hostage deal for another 48 hours. So a spokesman for Qatar's foreign ministry said, quote, "The state of Qatar announces as part of the ongoing mediation, an agreement has been reached to extend the humanitarian truce for an additional 2 days in the Gaza Strip," end quote. And this was later confirmed by both Hamas and Israel. So this 4-day truce has held since Friday, and the two sides swapped another group of prisoners on Monday. The exchange on Monday included 11 Israeli hostages and 33 Palestinian prisoners. So this exchange fulfilled Hamas's commitment to hand over 50 Israelis during the initial 4-day truce, and Israel's commitment to release 150 Palestinians. Hamas has also released 19 other hostages, and that 19 includes 17 Thai hostages, a Filipino, and a Russian dual citizen. And this was part of separate arrangements with these governments. So Qatar did not say what the terms of the 2-day extension are, but Israel has said that it would only extend the truce if Hamas releases 10 Israeli hostages each day. Israel is also required to release more Palestinian prisoners. And this, as far as I understand it, was the basic outline of the agreement that was brokered by Qatar in the first place. So they're kind of going by that, what they initially agreed to for the extensions. So this is kind of an odd story. The U.S. military said that it stopped a ship hijacking in the Gulf of Aden near Somalia on Monday as tensions continue to rise in the region due to Israel's campaign in Gaza. U.S. Central Command said in a press release that the destroyer USS Mason and allied ships responded to a distress call from the Central Park, which is a chemical tanker that's owned by Zodiac Marine. And Zodiac Marine is chaired by Israeli billionaire Eyal Ofer. So it's another Israeli-linked tanker. But this isn't the Houthis, according to the U.S. They say it is most likely the people that tried to hijack this ship were actually Somali. They came from Somalia. This was on the Somali side of the Gulf of Aden. So CENTCOM said that 5 armed individuals attempted to flee the scene on a small boat, but were detained by the U.S. military, so they have them under arrest. And hours after the incident, CENTCOM said 2 ballistic missiles were fired at the USS Mason from Houthi-controlled territory in Yemen, but landed in the Gulf of Aden 10 nautical miles away from the U.S. warship. So the Houthis, formerly known as Ansar Allah, seized an Israeli-linked tanker last week, but the Pentagon said on Monday that the attackers of the Central Park were likely Somali and not Houthi. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer vowed in a letter to his colleagues to bring a bill to the Senate floor as soon as December 4th to fund military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. President Biden has requested the funding as part of a massive $105 billion spending package. Schumer said, quote, "One of the most important tasks we must finish is taking up and passing a funding bill to ensure we, as well as our friends and partners in Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific region, have the necessary military capabilities to confront and deter our adversaries and competitors. That's why I intend to bring the president's national security supplemental package to the floor as soon as the week of December 4th, end quote. Schumer blamed Republicans for the delay in the passage of the $105 billion behemoth, which was formally requested on October 20th. He said the biggest holdup is, quote, the insistence by our Republican colleagues on partisan border policy as a condition for vital Ukraine aid, end quote. But Biden's request includes a lot of money for the border. It actually includes $13.6 billion for the border, so I'm not sure exactly what the Republicans want. And House Republicans have passed a bill that stripped the over $14 billion allocated to fund Israel's war in Gaza from Biden's $105 billion request. So they took it out. But this bill has been rejected by Democrats because it includes cuts to the IRS, and Schumer has refused to bring it to the floor for a vote in the Senate. Despite this impasse, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, the new speaker, he said on Monday that he is confident and optimistic that Congress will be able to pass funding for both Israel and Ukraine. President Biden has requested $61 billion to fund the proxy war in Ukraine for another entire year, despite Kiev's failed counteroffensive. Johnson said that Israel is a top priority for the U.S. and said Ukraine is also important but must be tied to border funding. But he's saying we got to keep funding this proxy war in Ukraine. Let's go. We're going to pass it. It's just a matter of, he's basically saying it's just a matter of negotiations with the Democrats. So according to the South Korean Defense Ministry, North Korean soldiers have begun rebuilding military posts along the border. In recent weeks, the relationship between North and South Korea took a further nosedive. Seoul announced that it would partly suspend its participation in a 2018 agreement that demilitarized the border, splitting Korea. Pyongyang then announced its full withdrawal from the deal in response. So South Korea, they released photos that they say is showing North Korean soldiers with arms and others building outposts along the demilitarized zone. Pyongyang destroyed the outpost previously during a period of warming relations between South Korea, North Korea, and the U.S. under the Donald Trump administration. And that was also under President Moon Jae-in in South Korea, who favored Korean unification. Now, President Yoon, who came in last year, vowed to take a very hard line with the North. And Biden is just giving him whatever he wants. Biden even sent a nuclear-armed submarine to South Korea just to wave it in North Korea's face, and obviously China's face as well. Just completely reckless. And tensions continue to rise on the Korean Peninsula.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
I want to start with a couple questions of my own, and let's start with Paul Krugman, because Krugman's been saying for quite some time now that he's just baffled that we have a really strong economy that people think is weak because Biden is just very bad at defending himself or making the case. And I think the way I've responded to that is, if the economy is really good, I think people wouldn't have to be propagandized into believing that it's good. They would recognize it themselves. So what do you make of this? The economy is actually, I'm sure you've heard this, actually really strong. People are just too dumb to see it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I doubt Krugman would be saying this if Trump were still president and all right. the numbers were identical. So there's so much more politics involved in this than there is real economic analysis. But I don't know that Krugman is even, qualified to do any economic analysis. But as far as, trying to BS that the economy is strong just to try to make Biden look good, clearly, if the economy is strong, you're right, the people don't have to be told the economy is good. They know that it's good. When you have to beat it into their heads and convince them that they're wrong and what they're experiencing is actually strength, even though it feels like weakness. But, the numbers belie these claims of a strong economy, especially the labor market, because all of the evidence supposedly for the strong economy is this great jobs market, this strong jobs market that we have, because we keep creating all these jobs and the official unemployment rate is low. And so we're being told that, the strong economy is a function of the strong labor market. And that's because of Bidenomics, right? Whatever the hell Bidenomics is. But if you actually look at what's going on, why are we creating all these jobs? Well, because people can't survive on their primary job. And so they need to supplement their income by moonlighting. And they take on second jobs and third jobs. Pretty much all the jobs that Biden has created have been for people who already had a job. Now, most people don't want 2 or 3 jobs. In fact, they don't even want one job. If they could get a paycheck without working, they would sign up for that. So people work because they have to. And so the fact that they have to work a lot harder now and for a lot more hours isn't a sign of a strong labor market. It's the sign of a weak labor market.
Well, let's stick for a second with our favorite New York Times columnist. He shared a chart maybe about a month ago, and it was tracking the CPI in the U.S. and then tracking the CPI in the Eurozone countries. And they more or less track each other closely. And that was his attempt to say that there's no way this is the Biden regime's, Biden administration's problem, because it's happening everywhere.
Yeah. Look, yes, because everybody made the same mistake, right? Everybody printed too much money. And if you look at the monetary and fiscal policies in the Eurozone, they're very similar to the monetary and fiscal policies over here. And so it makes sense that we're experiencing the same consequences of the same policy. So it doesn't let Biden and the Fed off the hook just because the ECB and the Bank of England and their governments were playing from the same playbook. We're all experiencing the predictable consequences of that policy. Krugman was the guy that said we don't have to worry about inflation, and he took a premature victory lap years ago, proclaiming that all the guys like me or like you who were warning about inflation, we were all wrong. Well, all the inflation that he said wasn't going to happen, it's happened. He just doesn't understand that there was a long lag between the creation of the inflation and the manifestation of that inflation in a more noticeable and harmful way in the CPI. When that inflation was making its way into the economy and was stopping in stocks and bonds and real estate and other assets, nobody really cared about the inflation because it was inflating the prices that people like to see go up. But now that all that inflation is in consumer prices, and of course, the inflation that was created during COVID was immediately injected right into the economy because it didn't pass through the financial banks and the assets. It went right into people's pockets and immediately went out of those pockets as they spent it. And so we had a big boost in the measured inflation rate. But I still think we have a long way to go to catch up to all the inflation that's in the pipeline. So I think we've experienced the beginning of the adjustment in prices, but prices still have a long way to rise to adjust for the increase in money supply.
Nevertheless, though, you're right about his premature victory lap. And now he's been trying to say, again, since about a month ago, that excluding several major categories of items, food, energy, shelter, used cars, stuff like that, that actually it's now back to price inflation is now back to manageable levels. So it was a problem, but now it's behind us.
Yeah, well, I guess the problem is when you're having to spend so much money on food and energy and insurance and stuff like that, you have nothing left over for the other stuff. So I guess the other stuff is going down in price because people can't afford to buy it anymore because the stuff that they're buying has gone up so much in price. But obviously, that's only temporary. because the supply of those goods is going to shrink, and then the price will go back up. But maybe there's a little bit of relief now. But of course, what nobody wants to point out, even if those prices are rising more slowly now, they're still rising from the elevated levels. So if you have prices go up 10, 15, 20% over a couple of years, and then they only go up 2 or 3%, I mean, that's on top of all the prior increases. So there's no relief coming. I mean, nobody is talking about rolling back the price hikes.
Know him, Michael, but who's I'm supporting for president, Michael Rechtenwald.
I don't know him.
So Michael Rechtenwald is he's a presidential candidate seeking the Libertarian Party nomination. He was a college professor for years who got like into trouble with the woke mob, and then got found like Mises and Rothbard and Hoppe and stuff like that. And became
Tom,
like
I think, was a big part of that.
Yes, that's correct.
And he's been working with the Mises Institute for years now and doing podcasts and writing articles for them. So he he was with a publisher that's published his last like 5 books.
But it's a minor little college. I never even heard of them.
What?
The publisher he has.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I mean, his advance must have been like $3,000. I don't know.
I don't know
the tiny little
details of that.
Okay.
From what I understood, it was a bigger thing that he lost than that. But I don't know the details of it. But they were like a kind of right-wing, anti-cancel culture.
Oh, then I thought it was some kind of university press.
No.
No.
You know,
Are
you going to mention who else dropped him?
Well, I don't know that, so
Okay.
I won't mention it, but I would like to hear you mention it. But let me just give the story,
sorry,
because
my
from what
bad.
I understand, this was like $100,000 type thing.
Oh, then I'm talking out of my ass. I'm sorry.
So they've published his last 5 books, which have all been very critical of the woke mind virus, of COVID insanity, of big tech censorship, things like that. So they've been all on board with this anti-cancel culture thing. And then he came out against the Israeli war in Gaza, and they dropped him for it and basically called him an anti-Semite.
Oh, wow.
And like, so anyway, it was just there's several things there, but obviously one of them is that.
Name them. Who's this publishing house? Because I'd never heard of them. And I thought I assumed just from the name that they were fringe.
I could find
I
it.
don't recall.
Because that's important, because it's not, who's the one that all the that Tom had, all the conservatives had, who's run by
Reginald or something like that? Regnery.
They're not Regnery.
Yes, they're not Regnery. All right, hold on. So what were you going to say, Angela? What's the other one?
Well, the other one, it appears, I believe I heard him say this on a live stream, that he was teaching courses at Hillsdale.
Hillsdale cancel him?
Right.
And he is, they want to part ways with him too.
I did hear that. I don't know if that's like official or not, but I heard that was a thing. Yeah.
So, I mean, my perspective on that is, rather than to blow them up and send them a bunch of hate mail and tell them how much they suck, we should write to them and say, like, please don't do this. This is a bad decision.
But
you need to support him.
I think he is, and this is one of the reasons I'm sure you didn't run. I think he was naive. I'm surprised it's coming from these quarters and this early, but there was no doubt in any of our minds in this room, and I'm sure in his, that if he got any traction as a libertarian candidate for president, the consequences for him and his family personally would not be minor.
Yeah.
It's very true.
It's a difficult situation when it's kind of like the better you do, the more in jeopardy you are, or the more, they're going to upset you, Michael, but it is amazing how much they'll be like, it's like all the pro-Israeli people are like, have you seen what's in Hamas's charter? Did you see what these people were chanting in the street? Did you see what they're saying? And you're like, yeah, but Benjamin Netanyahu just literally compared this to a biblical fight, and Lindsey Graham is saying flatten Gaza, and like all these things. Like, these people in very powerful positions are literally making these claims that, like, if you said this about any other group of people, you'd be like, whoa, holy shit. And in fact, by the way, I do think that about what's in Hamas's charter, and like what some of these people in protest are saying too is like fucking insane. But you're just like, yeah, why is it like people get into this tribalistic like attitude where their side saying that is completely acceptable?
It should
for
give
whatever
you
reason.
pause. Everybody should just mentally like, maybe something's up here.
Well, it gives me concern because I don't see a stable route towards peace if you have two sides who say you do not have a right to exist. And like, where do you go with that? It's so, and I compared it, I forgot what show it was on, I compared it to the whole North Korea situation and the Korean War, where you have Kim Il-sung, who is the devil, and you have Syngman Rhee in the South Korea, who's not a nice guy. And then but you had Mao and Stalin in the North, you have the US and you in the South, and it's the Korean people who pay the price. Yeah. And that doesn't mean Syngman Rhee is good, doesn't mean Kim Il-sung is good, doesn't mean these people aren't evil terrorists. It's just like, but what ends up happening is countries get leveled and lots of innocent people die. Yeah. By the way, my favorite take on this, and shout out to Tom on this, because he had this tweet about how, all this is awful going on. Oh, but it's just okay for Israel to go in and just level all these like hospitals and schools. And it's just like, are you on the side of Hamas or are you on the side of Israel? I'm a libertarian. I'm on the side of the buildings. I looked at that like, this is literally the most libertarian tweet I've ever seen. Has anyone worried about the private property?
That is that
was really hilarious.
It's a very neutral take.
Buildings?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that's been kind of fascinating over the last couple weeks, and of course this happens all the time. I mean, I couldn't even count up the examples of this over the last just few years, but how much like there's this complete propaganda narrative, and then on a dime it stops. And now it's so Orwellian. Like, it's just like, oh, this has always been the case. But so I remember many people, because I've been talking about the Ukraine war when I've been on Rogan like the last 3 times. And so many people have called me, Putin apologist, spewing Russian propaganda. Dave is pro-Putin is what they say all the time, which, like, I will say, when I'm critical of Israel, I do feel like this need to put a disclaimer on it, but I never felt the need with Ukraine because that, like, the accusation of being a Putin supporter is just so stupid on the face of it. Like, there is not one American who is sworn loyal to Vladimir Putin. That just
I think
doesn't.
You're wrong. I think a lot of these tradcons like him because of how
maybe,
anti-LGBT he is.
Maybe there's some people who like that, about him, but it's not. But even that isn't really like a Putin loyalist. But when you're talking,
they would prefer Putin to Kamala Harris as president.
Well, we'd have to sit down and have a real debate about that. I don't know. Kamala Harris, this is a pretty tough choice. Right? We only have so much time on this podcast. Michael, I don't know.
Yeah, Kamala or Putin.
Wow,
yeah, who's more innocent kids? But laughed about it. Yes. Putin's never laughed about it.
But when I'm talking about Israel, I do feel more of a need to be like, okay, listen, and I'm not like, there are people who hate Jews. I'm not one of those people. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm just being critical of the Israeli government. But like, I do see enough of that I'm like, okay, let me just like make it clear that like I'm not coming from that perspective. Anyway, so
what is your solution there, though?
The solution for Israel and Palestine? Well, I mean, like, I can tell you what I think the solution is, but then like actually getting to that would probably require a whole new generation of leadership that isn't the Likud party, that isn't Hamas.
It's a long road.
Okay, that's very fair.
But if you're going to examine the problem with Israel and the Palestinians, and you're not going to start with the acknowledgement that the way Israel was created was by forcefully taking a whole bunch of shit that had been owned by the Arabs and really forcefully evicting them by the hundreds of thousands, and that ever since 1967, they have been occupying in one form or another these Palestinians. All the way they won a war in 67 and just determined they can occupy them and subjugate them forever. And if you're not going to look at that, you're never even going to be looking at what the situation is. And I think there's I don't remember the quote off the top of my head. Maybe you will. I think it's an Abraham Lincoln quote, and it was about ending slavery. And he said something about how like we've got the tiger by the.
That's not Lincoln. You sure it's Lincoln?
No, maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think Lincoln's a tiger talker.
But anyway, it was something like we can't let him go and we can't keep him. You know what I mean? Like and I think the feeling from the Israeli side is like, well, we can't take our boot off their neck, or they're going to lash out at us.
But they're not wrong.
Well, they may not be wrong, but then that's a different conversation.
It is a
different
conversation.
But you've got to take your boot off of their neck because you just don't have a right to do it anymore.
But so listen, can we switch gears a little bit in the last few minutes here to your real speciality, which is America's relationship with Russia, and of course currently the horror show taking place in Ukraine. Now almost 2 years into it. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Can you tell us? Go ahead. Anything on your mind there?
It's just so unbelievable because it's something that didn't have to happen, and a lot of people like us were saying it didn't have to happen. This could have come to a peaceful settlement. But, Washington insisted on taking a different path. And so now we have we're approaching 500,000 Ukrainian casualties and probably very likely over 100,000 Russian casualties. And what you have is the wholesale destruction of the Ukrainian state, which is now going to be really nothing more than a rump state. And what we're going to have is a division of Europe running through Ukraine. None of this had to happen. There were alternatives. And the alternatives were refused, and those of us who floated alternatives were, constantly smeared as being Russian apologists and Putin puppets and unpatriotic or whatever. So it's a horrible, horrible tragedy. But I have a feeling that history is going to repeat itself, in that the people who were most enthusiastic in pursuing the war policy aren't going to pay a price at all. The same thing is going to happen that happened after Iraq. No one's going to pay any reputational price at all. And that's another tragedy because we never really seem to learn from our mistakes. I have a new piece up on antiwar.com today that talks about the role that the members of the Israel lobby play in the administration and in shaping the administration's policy.
Oh, really? I'm so sorry I missed that, man. I'm at least a day or a week behind on everything, James. You want to talk about that? Please do.
Well, it's interesting. Last week, Joe Biden, because he doesn't have a Secretary of State that actually knows what he's doing, he's been relying on people like William Burns and other people to deal with the heavies in the Middle East. And last week, he sent over a guy who's not very well known outside of Washington. He's Biden's senior advisor for energy policy. And his name is Amos Hochstein. And I thought it was interesting that the more I dug into his background, the more kind of trouble I got. Hochstein isn't an American. He was born and raised in Jerusalem. He served in the IDF. And then after a short stint at a PR agency in Tel Aviv, he came to the United States and went right to Capitol Hill and landed a gig. And in a very short order, was one of the staff directors to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. there's no record of Mr. Hochstein having gone to a university or any sort of academic or real world expertise in energy policy, but he goes from the IDF to Capitol Hill and then right up the ladder, right up the greasy pole in Washington. And he found himself as head of the energy portfolio during the Obama administration at the U.S. State Department. It seems at a minimum to be sort of odd that we have a Israeli representing the United States government during these negotiations. He was sent over by Biden this week to try to head off a expansion of the war between Israel and Lebanon. So things like that don't get a lot of attention here, but I think that
is really strange. I mean, if you said
it is odd, and I did run. I approached the State Department, just questioning, who is this guy? What's his background? What's his education? They refused to answer me, even though they of course have all the information on him because he worked for the State Department for over 6 years. I did run the story by a very well-known Middle East hand in Washington who knows all the Obama, Biden, Middle East players. He seemed to signal that I was on the right track. I wasn't being unfair. It's sort of troubling. It's sort of troubling that we have someone who, and this fellow's parents still live in Jerusalem. So he may well be an American citizen, and he may well be a loyal one. But there is such a thing as the appearance of conflicts of interests here, and it would seem that he has those. And of course, as I point out, after he was done overseeing the energy portfolio at the State Department under Obama and Clinton, he ended up, surprise, surprise, with a board seat on a Ukrainian gas and oil company.
Mm-hmm. Well, and after he went over there, Israel bombed Lebanon more and killed civilians and journalists more.
So anyway, that's up at Anti-War.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
I unfortunately received a strike on my YouTube channel just today, earlier this morning, and it is for my QAnon shaman, aka Jacob Chansley, interview that I did 3 months ago. The segment that they told me endorsed violence was in fact not at all that. I did appeal, and within, I'd say, 60 seconds of my appeal, they responded instantaneously saying, no, we've already reviewed thoroughly, and you have absolutely endorsed violence, which I did not do. Absolutely did not do. If you guys recall, I know it was 3 months ago, so you may not remember, but we ended that with like a 5-minute guided meditation by the shaman. That's really endorsing violence there, I guess. So I'm very frustrated, but thank goodness for Rumble. Thank goodness for Twitter, aka X. And I'll just continue to encourage you guys, subscribe over on Rumble, spread the word, share it with people. I have 30 days that I cannot publish to YouTube. Nothing I can do about it. But that's the deal. So let's get into it.
As a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
Explain to me what you see as, why you target or why you have a grudge against the Israelis.
The grudge is not necessarily a grudge. It's an objective assessment that no one will have the courage to speak about. They're controlling much of our foreign policy. They're influencing much of our domestic policy. Wolfowitz, as Undersecretary of Defense, manipulated President Bush #2 back into Iraq. They pushed definitely to try and get Bush before he left to move into Iran. We're conducting an expansionist policy of Israel, and everybody's afraid to say it. They control much of the media. They control much of the commerce of the country. And they control powerfully both bodies of the Congress. They own the Congress.
Are you an anti-Semite?
No, I'm not. That's exactly what they're going to say. And I expect that. What I am is an American. You see, I think America comes first. And we have a one-sided foreign policy in the Mideast. And we've alienated Arabs who have no way of fighting. So what they've done, and I predicted this on the House floor, is they would export violence to America. And they have. They have no other way to fight. I think President Obama knows this. I think he sees this. I think he wants to do something. I think his hands are tied. And I think he's dancing between the raindrops, trying to figure how I can politically machinate some scenario to mitigate these problems. Greta, I'm saying this. America is in danger if America doesn't take back the government without foreign interference.
That is Congressman James Traficant. He died in a tractor accident September 27, 2014, shortly after that interview. And seeing as I'm suspended from YouTube, I can play that clip and actually tell you what I think about it. Because I wouldn't feel safe to do so over on YouTube, that's for sure. I think he's telling the truth, okay? I think he's telling the truth. And as he said, no, it doesn't make him or I or anyone else that just sees the reality for what it is an anti-Semite. What it makes you is someone who's actually paying attention to what's actually happening and who's manipulating our political strings. And as he pointed out, it was Undersecretary Wolfowitz that did, in fact, play a huge role in getting the war on terror started. That's not about him being Jewish. It's about it being for Israeli interests as opposed to American interests. And I'm going to stop with all of the disclaimers and just talk about this because I think it's ridiculous that I have to disclaim everything and just say any foreign country that has that level of control over your political establishment is not benign. It's a bad thing. Do you want to have politicians who listen to other nations above your own interests as someone who's actually paying taxes to this government? Well, the answer ought to be, obviously, fuck no. That's not what I want. So, Mr. Traficant, who, I don't know if it's Traficanti, but I think it's Traficant, who was imprisoned and then died in a unceremonious fashion in 2014, I think he was probably telling the truth. And I'll leave it to you to decide if he died of natural causes or of that tractor accident. But there's a lot of danger that comes with speaking out about this stuff, unfortunately. And let me be very clear, not at all suicidal, just went to the doctor, perfect bill of health. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I am disturbed at the extent of foreign influence on our government. I don't like our government in the first place, but I really don't like the government when it works at the behest of foreigners. Because I'm the one that's paying these motherfuckers to go and start wars on behalf of Israel. That doesn't seem very fair now, does it? Not to mention, it then creates blowback against the American people because we're over there doing the bidding of a nation that isn't ours. And as he said, we're alienating the entire Arab world and the Muslim world. Upwards of 30% of the global population doesn't like America because of who we are in bed with. And in reality, I think who largely runs our government. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that that's somehow hateful of Jewish people, which, by the way, I love Jewish people. Like, all of my influence are Jewish, like almost all of them. So, yeah, that ain't it.
But Chris, I believe that the true libertarian society are the real environmentalists, because if you own the property, nobody has a right to mess with it and pollute it or destroy your property, and people should be punished by it. So it's the collusion of big government and big business that gets together and have abused, the environment and what has happened over the many, many years. And there's truth to that, but it won't be solved by just saying, what we need are more regulations. And Chris, I think that's what they're doing here. More regulations. They want to have healthy people, and we've got to tell them how much meat they're allowed to eat. And besides, that can destroy the farmers. Oh, that's okay. The farmers pollute 33% of all the pollution in the country. We have to get rid of it. Well, how are they going to eat if you don't have farmers? Oh, we never thought of that. So we'll have to think of that. We want you to think about the ramifications of these stupid things that government does. The bigger the government, the worse the ideas are. So I would say self-government, you make mistakes for oneself. And I would say local government makes mistakes. But I'll tell you what, it's the best system you can have is close government. But the bigger the government is, the more international it is, the more globalist it is, the worse the problems are, the bigger the solutions, and the less freedom we have.
But speaking of history, throughout all of human history, humans have struggled simply to eat, let alone meat. Meat was like hitting the jackpot. And we go to the supermarket and it's all laid out for us, but we have it so good and nobody, again, knows the history. Wealthy nations would eat meat, and the poor, they're called third world nations. They suffer with much, much less, if at all. But these are the authoritarians. They hate middle-class people. They hate people that rise up and are able to sustain themselves, because you're supposed to live at their beck and call, not be independent, eating what you want. So they say, no, you'll eat insects instead. We'll grow meat in the lab for you. And, they're trying this stuff, and the people obviously do not want it. When you look at the stocks of Beyond Meat and some of the other ones, the people don't want this stuff. You want real food. So now if somebody doesn't want to eat meat voluntarily, fine. That's what freedom is all about. Eat what you want. It's nobody's business, especially the UN, to tell us and then try to cloak it in science after COVID. I mean, who believes anything is for science after COVID? So fortunately, the UN is like a big PR firm for the globalists. We don't have to listen to them. Hopefully Americans, I don't think they would ever give up meat for the United Nations.
Right. You know, there's a famous quote out of history and during the French Revolution when Marie Antoinette was quizzed, but what will the people eat? And if we don't provide this and that, and her comment was, if there's no bread, let them eat cake. And that's been the accuracy, the exact accuracy of that quote sometimes is a question, but it makes a very strong point. That is the attitude of most politicians. You know, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to wreck with their system. They're all going to lose their jobs, but well, let them apply for food stamps. You know, something like that. They're totally cavalier about it, and this is what has gone on. And you know, there's going to be a lot of problems from this. But Chris, I really don't believe the people who are the leaders who come up with these crazy ideas are the ones that are going to suffer. If you look at one as sort of the missionary for all this radical environmental stuff is Kerry, former Senator Kerry, who works for Biden now. He doesn't, you know, he was so arrogant when they said, yeah, but what about when you fly your jet airplane all the place? Your carbon, the carbon you're creating is far above any average person. He had an easy answer. He says, but I'm important. I have to get there and get to these meetings and plan how we're going to save the people. So I am much better. If anybody looks at that statement, it's amazingly arrogant because most of the time they try to hide their arrogance. But one thing good I think that came out of the COVID lockdown was whenever somebody locally or internationally came up with a regulation which made no sense and caused more trouble than good, and when they were exposed as never following the regulations they wrote, the people rebelled against that. That's finally what cracked that whole system, is because the people who wrote it. But that might be a general rule of politicians. I mean, if they write rules against us for any reason, they don't expect that they have to do it. They are dictatorial, and they will have their own life. And that is the reason why the most important thing we do in moving a political system is take the power away from the government, because they do not represent the people. They buy their way into office, and then they control us, and they're the ones who think they can always escape. But eventually, hard times comes, violence comes, people get a little bit angry. It's preventable if we just wise up and modify our system of authoritarianism. Chris?
Absolutely, Dr. Paul, and you hit it right on the head, arrogance. And globalism really is peak arrogance. Because they tend to view all of humanity as just a bunch of animals that they herd. They believe it's their job to be in charge of feeding us, of educating us. Who do we interact with? Where do we travel? Are we allowed to travel? Maybe they'll put a kill switch in a car. And Congressman Massey has been fighting that. Some are even eugenicists. They go even further. They believe they should be in charge of how people should reproduce and who should reproduce. And they have the audacity, many people, to say that there's just too many people in the world. They know how many people there should be and what the weather should be and how the climate should change. I mean, this really is peak arrogance. They're not acting as people. They are pretending to be God. And isn't that the original sin? I mean, whether or not you believe in Adam and Eve, at least get the lesson from it. That was it. It was not knowing your place in this world. And the globalists do not know their place in this world. And they're really just wrecking things for everybody.